James writes in James, the 3rd chapter, starting in verse 1, "But not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone doesn't stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well. Now if we put the bits into horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at the ships also, though they're so great and driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue," verse 5, "is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The very world of iniquity, the tongue is set among our bodies as that which defiles the entire body, and sets on fire the course of our life, and it is set on fire by hell. For every species of beasts and birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed, and has been tamed by the human race, but no one can tame the tongue, for it is a restless evil and full of deadly poison." In our last quarter, we discussed the book of James. We talked about how James chapter 1 is kind of a microcosm of the entire book, and pulled parts of James chapter 1 to kind of apply to the rest of the book. And I think James, throughout the course of that book, hits on various themes. But one of the things that became apparent to me the more we read through week by week, one of the things that became the most apparent to me was just how intense James gets. And you kind of realize it when you read it just kind of cover to cover. For instance, when you look at James chapter 5 and he starts lashing out some very, very pointed type comments, you can see how James gets really, really intense with what he says. But to me, one of the best examples of this is found in James chapter 3, where he talks about the dangers concerning the tongue. And you can almost tell in those first 8 verses, he's hitting an apex. He's finding this kind of core idea that he's driving towards. There's one point that he really wants to make. And so he starts off soft kind of in verse 1, where he says, don't become teachers. And then he gives the explanation as to why. Because there's a whole bunch of dangers that kind of goes along with that. And so he builds this whole section up until finally he gets to verses 6, 7, and 8, where he talks about the dangers of the tongue. And there's no mistaking the dangers of the tongue. By the time you get to verses 6, 7, and 8, James is very emphatic that the tongue, even though it's a tiny little thing, can do a whole lot of damage. Now, it makes sense, obviously, as you look at the book of James, that there are some good things that it can do. As he would say right after this, you can bless your father, you can pray towards God. There's things you can do with your tongue that are good. But the tongue also is one of those things that, if employed wrongly, can be very, very damaging. And James could have used a whole bunch of different illustrations. He could have talked about, gone on to talk about slander. He could have gone on to talk about hate. But there's one this morning that I want to talk about, I think is probably one of the biggest, even though it's probably one of the most subtle, and that's gossip. To me, you don't get much more destructive either in a local congregation or in a local family or in any kind of organization whatsoever than gossip. Gossip is one of those things that you kind of is whispered behind closed doors, and then as soon as those closed doors are open, those two people go out into the world, it can wreak unseen damage in the world. It can destroy relationships, it can destroy families, it can destroy organizations. I have seen husbands and wives go at each other's throat because of things they said to other people about each other. I've seen churches split right down the middle because there was something that happened and then it whispered throughout the course of a few weeks, and all of a sudden that church that once was harmonious and happy now is in shambles and is destroyed. It's a version of its former self because of this idea of gossip. Now somebody would say, well, I don't understand how gossip, even though it's just words, I don't understand how gossip can impact a congregation like that. I want you to encourage you to look over to Matthew the 12th chapter. Look at Matthew chapter 12. Jesus doesn't talk necessarily about gossip specifically, but I want you to notice the correlation between words and the things that come out of our mouth and the impact that it can have on the world around us. In Matthew the 12th chapter, starting in verse 33. Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 33. Listen to what Jesus has to say here. He says very simply, verse 33, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. We gloss right over verse 33 whenever we read this section, but take the time and back up to see what it's saying. It talks about the tree as the source, and the fruit is the evidence of it. And so whatever the source is, the evidence, the fruit, is going to bear witness to the source. Whatever the source is, the evidence will display it. That's what he says in verse 33. Verse 34, you brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak what is good? That's the direct application of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The end of verse 34, for the mouth speaks out of that which fills the heart. The good man brings out of his treasure what is good, and the evil man brings out of his evil treasure what is evil. But I tell you that every careless word that people speak, they will give an accounting for it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Verse 37 should strike fear into a lot of us. Because even though we have a lot of different depictions about Judgment Day, and I don't mean that we change the sheep and the goats. That's going to be there, Matthew 25. The great judgment, that's all there. But we sometimes wonder to ourselves, what is it going to be like? What is God going to say to us? What's the specific criteria? And you can look at various things. Actions, obedience, all that is a part of that. But what he says in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 37 specifically is the things that we say. How do we interact with each other? What comes out of our mouth? What do we talk about? Is it filled with hate? Is it full of slander? Or is it full of love? Do we bless other people? Or do we, like Job, curse the person that's just trying to be problem cast? How do we talk about the world around us? And even though words and actions aren't necessarily correlated here in Matthew the 12th chapter, I don't think you can deny that they have an impact. Because if you have hate in your heart, if you're going about slandering, if you're going about gossiping, then it will impact your relationship with other people. If I'm gossiping about somebody, behind their back, talking about them and going around telling about this and talking about this and that, then the next time I see them, it will impact my relationship with that person. And so lest we think that gossip is just something innocent, that's just kind of careless conversation that just happens to come out of our mouths, and we don't really mean it, we don't really want to talk about it, it just kind of happens, lest we downgrade the impact of gossip. Remember Matthew chapter 12, verse 37, and remember the fact that it can impact our eternal destiny. The question becomes then, what is gossip? We can talk about theories about it, we can talk around it, but what is gossip? And I love this definition about gossip. Gossip is simply the unconstrained conversations about other people. There's about 12 other definitions that you can put there, but this is my favorite. Primarily because it uses this word unconstrained. When you think about this idea, we all recognize what gossip is, especially when you use that word to describe it. You have a bunch of people, maybe you have 2 people, maybe you have 5 people, maybe you have 20 people, and they're all talking about different things. They're conversing, they're talking about so-and-so, or talking about this, talking about sports, talking about politics. And then inevitably, because we're dealing with people, what happens is somebody then becomes the focal point. Did you hear what Jeff said? And I just said Jeff because my eyes happened to hit him right before I started talking. But did you hear what Jeff said? I cannot believe what Ray did the other day. I cannot believe how Linda had the audacity to do that. And so you have this seed of something happening, and then all of a sudden, if it's one person or if it's 5 people, they all just start piling on. And we start talking about, I can't believe how silly that is. I can't believe how wrong that is. And then we always say the immortal phrase, somebody should really talk to him about that. And then, of course, we all go our separate ways, and A, nobody talks to them about it, and B, nobody does anything else about it. And that phrase, that word specifically that he mentions there in that definition of gossip, this idea of being unconstrained, has that herd mentality where once something jumps on somebody, it's kind of got that idea of a kill in the wild. When there's a carcass there, you have one lion jumping on it, all of a sudden the entire lions, all the lions jump on it. They all want to go in for that kill. That's what you have in a conversation. Where somebody is run down and somebody has a little bit of something said about them, and then everybody just kind of starts piling on. Before you know it, that person's reputation is in shambles. That person's character, at least in the eyes of a lot of people, is shot because of that unconstrained conversation. I would argue to you that nobody really wants this. Unless you just have really some kind of dark part of your heart, I would argue to you that nobody really wants this. Nobody wants to gossip and tear down somebody, at least not that I know about. And if you do have that dark part in your heart, we have a front pew that is waiting for you, and I'll meet you there in about 20 minutes. But I would argue too that nobody really has that dark part of their heart. And so the reason that we all engage in this type of unconstrained conversation is because of a couple of reasons. Number one, I think we're trying to, in a sense, I think we're trying to help people. I think when we get into this group and we start talking about so-and-so, this person that did that, or that person that said that, we kind of jump on and we kind of pile on because we say, well, I'm just trying to help that person. That's why we get to that point where we say, well, somebody should really talk to them. We know it's a problem. And so we mask that gossip, we mask that conversation because we're all trying to get to the root of it and we're really just trying to help. Now there is a point, and it's not a gossip by any means, but there is an argument to be made for talking to people about how to help somebody. That comes from a genuine desire to help them. We'll talk about that in a second. Gossip is not that. Gossip is when these unconstrained conversations take place and people pile on unjustly, and then nobody does anything about it. You say, well, I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to talk them through it. I'm just trying to talk through myself and understand what happened. That's gossip, ladies and gentlemen. We'll also mask it, I would argue, because it really just makes us feel better about ourselves. There's something about our lives, whenever we start piling on, whenever we start talking about the negative aspects of somebody else, or we start talking about how I can't believe, once again, that Linda, of all people, I can't believe that Linda did that. It makes me feel a little better about myself. It makes me feel a little better about who I am. My failings all of a sudden aren't really that big of a deal, because after all, look at Linda's failings. I don't know why I'm just harping on you. I'll pick Brandy. She's sitting right behind me next. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 8, I think is a perfect illustration of this. Where it says, like dainty morsels, these words go down into your soul. That's a lot of the way that gossip is. Because when we're piling on, it makes us feel better about ourselves. I can't believe he did this. I can't believe he said that. And I feel better about who I am. And you can look at passages that describe interpersonal relationships, such as 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 4 through 8. Love is this. Love is this. And there's a great exercise if you're wanting to kind of test your relationship with that. There's a great exercise where you can substitute your own name in for love. Brady is kind. Brady is loving. That's obviously a horrible illustration. But Brady is not quick to wrath. Brady is all these different things. You can substitute your name for it. But there's one thing that's said there in 1 Corinthians 13 that I think is especially pertinent to what we're discussing. And that's where it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 that love does not rejoice in iniquity. That's one of those phrases that you read in 1 Corinthians 13 that just kind of stands out. The rest of them you understand. Love is long-suffering. Love is hopeful. But love does not rejoice in iniquity. And what that says to me is when I see a brother in sin, and I see a brother that is erring, a brother that is really struggling with something, or maybe a brother or a sister that has created a very grave sin, what's my attitude towards that? Do I react on that in a positive way because all of a sudden now I have an opportunity to help them? Now I can guide them. Now I can be of service to them. Or do I react in a sinful way? Where I take some kind of morbid pleasure at that because all of a sudden I realize that I'm not the only one that messes up. Because after all, my sins aren't nearly as bad because of that person. That's the parable of the Pharisee and the publican in a nutshell. Where the Pharisee walks in and sees the publican and he says, I'm thankful that I'm not like this tax collector. That's that attitude. And that's the attitude that prevails so oftentimes when we get in these gossipy type conversations where we just can't help but revel in somebody else's problem. Ultimately, the truth about it is that we gossip and we talk down about other people. We bully other people, not because of their errors, but because of our own insecurities. There was a study done, and this is a mouthful, there was a study done in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, which you can look that up if you want. There was a study that was done in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology that found that women, and I would argue that it's probably applicable to men as well, that found that women are more prone to gossip about other women that they perceive as a threat. That has nothing to do with their failings, has nothing to do with their issues, has nothing to do with their wrongdoings. It has to do with whether or not they feel like their social situation is being threatened. That's where gossip starts to creep in. And I would argue too that's the same with men. Look at Matthew the 18th chapter. A couple pages over, depending on where you are, but look at Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 12. Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 12. Jesus says, what do you think? If any man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go and search for the one that is strayed? If it turns out that he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 which have not gone astray. Verse 14, so it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones perish. Verse 14 in this section is the crux of this idea, the crux of this passage. Because what he talks about in verse 14 is the idea of God himself. What is his goal? What is his purpose? What is his mission? What is his longing? And the longing of God, according to verse 14, is that nobody should perish. That nobody should turn away from God. That nobody should turn away from him. And so when he says this in verses 12 and 13 about leaving the 99 and going to look for the one, that talks about the love that God has for us, that God has for anybody that turns aside from him. But then look at verse 15 and notice this connection here. If your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. But if he doesn't listen to you, take one or two more with you, so that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact may be confirmed. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even in church, let him be to you as a Gentile and as a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. What's the goal, ladies and gentlemen? We quote Matthew 18 all the time when we talk about interpersonal relationships. We quote Matthew 18 all the time when we talk about somebody in our congregation who's done sin. But what's the goal goal of Matthew chapter 18. The goal isn't to get to step 3 where you can then drag them in front of a public tribunal and crucify them openly for everybody. That's not the point. The point is, he says there, verse 15, it's to win your brother. Somebody errs in our congregation, somebody errs against us personally. So we go to them and we talk to them, we explain to them the fault, just for the sole purpose of them getting their life back on track. They don't listen to us, take some witnesses. Because of the reason he points out, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every matter shall be established. Take some people with you. Go to them. This is the error. It's serious. We all saw it. We all know that you're in sin. If they don't repent then, go bring it before the church. The church as a whole says, this is the sin. And you're wrong. You need to repent. And if they don't listen to the church, that's why he says, let them be you as a Gentile tax collector. Because what can you do at that point? What other person can you bring before them? What other group can you bring before them that will show them the error of their way? The point, ladies and gentlemen, is not about crucifying them. It's not about making a public display of somebody's sin. Always with the idea towards redemption. Always with the idea of forgiveness. When somebody talks to you, when somebody comes up to you with gossip, I would argue that should be the main purpose. Every single time somebody comes up to you with something to say about somebody else, ask them, what's the reason for telling you? Is it to build up, or is it to take care of it? Or is it just because we like to have this kind of side conversation about Jack that he doesn't know about, that we kind of take a lot of pleasure in? What's the goal of this conversation? And if the goal is to build up, then there's a very simple process. If I come to you and I say, here's what I heard about so-and-so, there's a very simple thing you can do. Take them by the arm and walk them over and say, look, he has something against you, Jack. Talk about it. And if building up, if redemption is truly the goal, then that conversation will take place. But if it's just about gossip, then they'll shy away and run out the door faster than anything else. What's the reason for telling you? What's the reason for telling me? I want you to look at Ephesians chapter 4. The goal whenever we have conversations that involve anybody else at all, especially when there's some kind of negative, the goal should always be to build each other up. I want you to look at Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 25. Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 25. He says, therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth each one of you with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and yet don't sin. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. By the way, we talked about that verse in terms of not lashing out or being angry and yelling at other people. When you look at the context, as he mentions there in verse 25, it has to do with each other. Speak the truth of one another. Don't let the sun go down in your wrath. Don't give the devil an opportunity, verse 27. There's less to do with yelling at each other and more to do with how we treat each other. Verse 28, he who steals must steal no longer. Rather, he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has need. Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear. I ask you again, ladies and gentlemen, what's your goal in talking to other people? If I have something against somebody, and I walk up to somebody else and say, I heard this, I saw this, I know this about that person. What's the goal? What's the reason for me telling them? Is it to ask them for help in dealing with the situation? Is it asking for assistance in going with me and talking to them? Or is it strictly just for me to gossip? Well, Paul understands in Ephesians chapter 4, and Ephesians as a whole, especially here in chapter 4, is about building up the body. And what Paul understands is there's nothing that will tear that body down quicker than anger, gossip, slander, and hate towards each other. How do we treat each other? I love what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. We talk sometimes about how Paul really puts himself out there for people. His self-sacrificial nature, his love, and his passion for other Christians. But to me, you see that probably most apparent here in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Look at verse 14. And this is at the end of two pretty intense letters. If you have read 1 Corinthians, you know how serious he takes the sins in that congregation. And 2 Corinthians, in large part, is about trying to rebuild. He talks about the sins in chapter 1. They've dealt with a lot of them. 2 Corinthians is about how to build past that. And so by the time you get to the end of this book, now he's talking about his own love, his own goals, his own purpose for those people. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, starting verse 14. He says, here for this third time I am ready to come to you, and I will not be a burden to you. For I don't seek what is yours, but you. For children are not responsible to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. He He's saying, I'm not coming to you with financial, material gain in mind. That's not why I'm coming to you. Because of verse 15, I will most gladly spend and be expended for your souls. If I love you more, am I to be loved less? But be that as it may, I didn't burden you myself. Nevertheless, crafty fellow that I am, I took you in by deceit. That has sarcasm all over it, by the way. Certainly, verse 17, I have not taken advantage of you through any of those whom I've sent to you, have I? I urged Titus to go, and I sent the brother with him. Titus did not take any advantage of you, did he? Did we not conduct ourselves in the same spirit and walk in the same steps? All this time, verse 19, you have been thinking that we are defending ourselves to you. Actually, it is in the sight of God that we have been speaking of Christ. And all of this for your upbuilding, beloved. For I am afraid that perhaps when I come to you, I may find you to be not what I wish, and may be found by you to not be what you wish. There will be strife, jealousy, angry tempers, disputes, slanders, gossip, arrogance, and disturbances. And I am afraid that when I come again, my God may humiliate me before you, and I may mourn over many of those who have sinned in the past, and have not repented of the impurity, immorality, and sensuality which they have practiced. You want to know what some of that impurity, immorality, and sensuality is? You can look a few verses earlier when he talks about strife and jealousy and slander. What Paul is saying in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, in verses 14 through 21 is, I am being spent and being expended for you. That's the whole goal. Our reputation among you is not that great. Not all of you care that I'm even there. Some of you think I'm coming for ulterior motives, but let it be certain, Church at Corinth, that my whole goal in coming to you is holy. My whole goal in being amongst you is to build you up, to drive you towards growth. And I would argue that's not just Paul's attitude. That should be our attitude as well. When we come into these services, we have a lot of different ideas. We have a lot of different goals. We want to worship. We want to fellowship with each other. We want to learn. We want to do all these different things. But one of my goals should be, according to Hebrews chapter 10, 24 and 25, one of my goals should be to build you up. And if I come to the services looking to gossip, or if I come into these worship services looking to tear somebody else down, talk behind your back to somebody else, that's not going to go anywhere. And that's going to tear a congregation down faster than anything else. I would ask you number two, ask them the very honest question, do you have all the information? Do you have all the information about this situation? Gossip, ladies and gentlemen, thrives on half-truths. If I hear something about somebody, I'm getting it not only from one person's perspective, but I'm also not hearing anybody else's, because that's the thing that matters the most to me right now. The first thing that you hear is always, in your mind, in our minds, the most true. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 17, Solomon points this out when he says, the first to plead his case seems right until another one comes and examines it. The thing that we hear first about somebody is always the thing that sticks in our mind. It's always the thing that we remember. And that's how gossip thrives. Gossip thrives on hearing, I heard this about somebody, I saw something, I don't have the context, but I heard it and now I'm telling you about it. That's how gossip thrives. That's the way it spreads like a cancer throughout a congregation. And so I like that story. I'm sure you have heard the story of a village of blind men. And an elephant walks among them, and they're all trying to figure out what an elephant is. And so these blind men walk up to this elephant. One of them grabs the tail, and he says, oh, an elephant is like a snake. The other one walks up to the leg and grabs the leg and says, oh, this elephant is like a tree trunk. Another person walks up to the elephant, grabs its ears, and it says, oh, the elephant is like a fan. The other one grabs the trunk and says, oh, this is like an ostrich. It's got a long neck. All of these different people, by virtue of their own perspective on it, have their own opinion about what happened. And that's how gossip thrives, ladies and gentlemen. I saw something, I heard something, and now I'm telling somebody else, but that's the only perspective that that person is getting. It's my own perspective about what happened, my own perspective about that situation. That's how gossip thrives, and that's how gossip disseminates. I want you to look at James chapter 4. I've gone to James a few times today. We're going to look at it one more time here in James chapter 4. This is not, at least in my opinion, one of those times where James really hits his zenith, but he makes a really valid point here about the way that we look at each other. In James chapter 4, starting in verse 11, he says, don't speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but you're a judge of it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, and one who has the ability to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? Now what he's not saying in this passage, what James is not saying in James chapter 4, is you should never look at anybody else and never form an opinion about them. Number one, that's impossible. But number two, that misses the point of what he's saying here. In James chapter 4, verses 11 through 12, when he says, you can't judge somebody else and practice the law itself. You can't do those things. He talks about the impossibility of it. I can't live according to the law if I set myself up as God and judge how well Howard lives by it. It's just an impossibility. I can't do that. And so what he says here in James chapter 4 is, don't make yourself a judge of it. Make yourself busy in doing it. That's exactly what he says in James chapter 1. Look into the mirror, examine yourself, and see how well we go up against it. I would argue, too, that the law referred to here is found in Leviticus 19. Look back at that. Leviticus chapter 19. Buried deep in Leviticus chapter 19 is this law that is mentioned, not only here, it's mentioned in other places. Look at Leviticus chapter 19, starting in verse 15. One of the themes that's present, not only in Leviticus, but in Deuteronomy, is how we treat each other. How do I handle brethren? How do I handle other people? Leviticus chapter 19, starting in verse 15. He says, you shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor prefer to the great, for you are to judge your neighbor fairly. You shall not, verse 16, go about as a slanderer among your people, and you are not to act against the life of your countrymen, against the life of your neighbor, for I am the Lord. The I am the Lord is based on authority. I'm the Lord. I do that. Don't worry about talking evil about other people. Don't try to pass judgment on them. That's God's job. He stands. He's the ultimate judge. Verse 17, you shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but you shall not incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor shall you bear any grudge against the sins of the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That's the law, ladies and gentlemen. That's the law that he mentions there in verse 18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Mentioned in the New Testament at least a couple times. That's the law that he's talking about. And so when you get to James chapter 4, and he talks in verses 11 and 12, don't be a judge of the law, be a doer of the law. That's the argument that he's making. Don't be so busy wondering how other people are handling their life. Don't be so busy wondering how other people are living or loving other people. Love people yourself. Don't set yourself up as a judge and as a doer of the law, because those two are impossible. Live the law. Let God be the judge. Ask them, too, when somebody comes up to you with gossip. Ask them this, too. Who else have you told about this? This is a good question to ask, not only because you want to know how far the damage is. You want to know whether or not they've told everybody. And by the way, if you tell Joe, you can pretty much count on to be telling everybody. So you want to know what the damage is. I think people think I'm serious when I go. You want to ask number one what the damage is. Do a lot of people know about this? Is this something that everybody knows? Because we need to contain it if possible. But number two, the reason you're asking this question is you want to know how trustworthy that person is. If you want to know how trustworthy somebody is, ask them, who else have they told about it? Have you spread it to everybody? Or are you asking, or are you telling me for the express purpose of doing something about it? If they haven't told anyone else, you can feel safe in your own response. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 13, two quick verses. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 13, he says, he who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy conceals a matter. What type of person are you dealing with? When someone comes to you and brings gossip, when someone comes to you and tells a story about somebody else, what type of person are you dealing with? Are we dealing with somebody who's trustworthy? Or are we dealing with somebody who likes to go around and spread secrets about other people? Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 19, he who goes about as a slanderer reveals secrets. Therefore do not associate with the gossip. It's in your own best interest, and it's in my own best interest, ladies and gentlemen, to not be the type of person that associates with people that gossip. And I'll give you one good reason for it. Listen to this. If they gossip to you, they will gossip about you. I'm going to say that again. If they gossip to you, they will gossip about you. And so ask yourself, when somebody comes to you bringing gossip to you, who else have you told? Because you want to know what type of person you're dealing with. Is this somebody that I can work in league with, concert with, to try and help the situation? Or am I just going to be another unwilling accomplice in the phone game with this? What's the end goal here? There's a story. And I thought this was going to be a completely original story until Joe told it to me about an hour ago. Apparently it's not a completely original story. I thought I was the only one. But there's a story about a young man in the town who had committed the sin of gossip. And he was sincere about it. He was contrite about it. He went to this town mentor, somebody he looked up to. And he said, I've been guilty of gossiping about somebody in town, and I would love to know how I can make it right. And so the mentor told him, all right, what I want you to do is I want you to get a bag of feathers. And I want you to go to every house in town. I want you to put one feather on every doorstep. Which sounds sounds weird when you think about it. But I want you to put one feather on every doorstep. So the next day the young man got up, went around, put one feather on every doorstep in town. Probably took him all day. Comes back to the mentor the next morning, says, okay, what do I do now? The mentor says, I want you to go and I want you to collect every one of those feathers. The young man went out towards the town, looked at all these doorsteps, and none of the feathers were there. Came back the next day and said, there were no feathers. I don't know what to do now. He said, that's exactly right. That's the way the gossip works. You can spread it. You can put the feathers out there. But once they're gone, they're gone. It's impossible to get them back. That's the way that gossip is. Gossip operates because we find something sensational, we find something about somebody, and whether we're sincerely trying to help, at least maybe initially, or we're trying to make ourselves feel better about my own situation, we spread it to other people. And once it's out of our mouth, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot control how other people receive it and how other people distribute it. So be careful about what you talk about. Be careful about what I talk about. Be careful about what we do with information about our life. If you're here this morning for some reason you haven't heard the gospel of God, in sharp contrast to God, the gospel is the greatest message ever. That's the thing that we should be sharing to other people. That's the thing that we should be spreading like wildfire. I'm here to tell you that the best decision you'll ever make to put Christ on through the waters of baptism, rise up to walk in newness of life. If you need to make that decision, I would encourage you to do it now.